It was an afternoon that might have been ordinary if not for a single moment of recognition, a moment that would change a life. The sun pressed down on Ouagadougou, heat wavering above asphalt and dust. President Ibrahim Traoré had just left a surprise visit to a neighborhood school. His motorcade idled at the curb, engines whispering, when something at the roadside snagged his attention. A man slumped against a cracked wall. A tin cup at his feet, clothes ragged, face hollowed by years of hardship. Passers-by stepped around him as if he were part of the pavement. Traoré frowned, something in that silhouette tugging at memory. He told his security to hold. No argument. The man looked up. For a breath the world narrowed to two faces. "Ibrahim?" The voice rasped, disbelief in a lifetime lodged in one syllable. The president's chest tightened. "Musa," he answered, stepping forward. The man who rose with trembling knees had once been full of life. Now he was a shadow of that fellow pupil who had shared books and dreams with the young Traoré. They gripped each other's shoulders in a silence that said more than words. Musa tried to protest, ashamed of his clothes, unwilling to climb into a polished car. "I can't go like this," he whispered. Traoré's voice was soft but absolute. "You will come with me." Within an hour, Musa bathed, dressed in clean clothes, and sat at a table, with steam rising from food he had not expected in months. He ate as if each bite were an answer to a long prayer. Cautious, grateful, bewildered. When the plates were cleared, Traoré poured 2 glasses of juice and leaned forward. "Tell me," he said, "what happened to you?" Musa's story started 3 years earlier. He had been a school principal in Bobo Dioulasso, a man of steady reputation who had saved, built a small house, married a woman named Stella. At first, life was ordinary happiness. Then suddenly, his world unspooled. He walked in one afternoon to find his wife in bed with another man. He left the house without a fight, trembling, and she took the next shocking step. She claimed ownership of the home, produced forged documents, and the courts, swayed, ordered him out. His job followed. Legal costs devoured his savings. Humiliation became hunger. He drifted from friend to shelter until the pavement became his only roof. "I wanted to die," he confessed, voice breaking. Traoré listened, face unreadable, then reached across the table and gripped his old friend's hand. "You deserve none of that," he said. "Your story will change." That night Musa slept in a bed he had not imagined for years. Traoré sat at his desk long after the candles were snuffed, papers untouched, thinking of the boy who once shared books and protection in schoolyards. He remembered how Musa had shielded him from bullies, had lent him books when there were none, had spoken hope into a future neither of them then believed would arrive. The president picked up a pen, not to write policy, but to set in motion a promise. "I will give you a fresh start," he thought, as if to himself. Morning arrived with the smell of warm bread and eggs. A staff member knocked and served Musa breakfast, calling him "Sir," with a kind of respect that felt foreign and tender. He walked the presidential garden half numb, trying on this new reality like an ill-fitting coat that might yet warm him. Traoré met him simply without ceremony. "I made some arrangements," the president said. "You'll see a doctor today." There is something else after that. The doctor's visit drew tears, simple care, medicines that mended what hunger and shame had eroded, a haircut that erased months of the street from his face. Later, the car pulled up beside a small house with cream walls and neat shutters, a modest garden framed by a low fence. Musa could only whisper, "Whose is this?" Traoré smiled with the familiar warmth of a boy who remembered promises kept. "Yours," he said. "Fully paid. No one can take it from you." Inside the house, sunlight warmed a living room with a modest couch, a tidy kitchen, and a small desk that caught Musa's eye. "I've also set up something that fits your hands," Traoré told him. "A bookstore and school supply stall next to a secondary school. You will run it." "I will cover the first year?" Musa's hands trembled as hope found a foothold. He thought of the tens of hungry faces he had seen on the street, the students who lingered after class, the small raw need for paper and pens. Tears that night were not of shame, but of beginning. For the first days, Musa moved through a new life like a man rising from a long winter. He tended the shop with a careful discipline born of former dignity. Children came for notebooks, teachers for textbooks. Musa spoke gently with pupils, correcting a math step, explaining with a patience that had only been sharpened by loss. Neighbors who once glanced past his begging cup now greeted him by name, and the street began to call him Mr. Musa again. In him, people saw a small miracle, not luck, but repair. Word reached the neighborhood quickly. A man who had vanished from polite society had returned with steady hands, a shop that bore his careful handwriting on inventory slips, and the quiet authority of someone who had learned to rise. He slept soundly for the first time in years, and when he walked the market the next morning, sellers tipped him in greeting rather than turning away. He had a place to sleep, food that was not borrowed, and a reason to wake. Before the month closed, something else happened. The past came looking for him. Stella, his ex-wife, turned up at the edge of the shop one afternoon. Her face had lost former polish. Her suitcase spoke of displacement. She asked for shelter, her voice thin with regret. Musa listened, and when she asked to stay, he held her gaze and replied with a quiet that spoke of dignity reclaimed. "I forgave long ago, but this is not your home." He did not gloat. He did not punish. He had moved beyond the place where bitterness could take root. That evening, Musa rang Traoré. He told his friend what had transpired and, in a voice that trembled with something like peace, said simply, "I told her no." Through the line, Traoré's smile was almost audible. "I'm proud," he said. In the weeks that followed, the shop became more than a business. It became a classroom of its own, a place where hope was purchased, along with pencils. Musa set aside a reading corner for neighborhood children. He began to see familiar faces return with questions, with homework, with trust. One day, a woman in a plain blue dress entered the shop. She bought textbooks and lingered, spoke warmly about the children she taught. Grace, she said her name was, and over repeated visits, a quiet friendship grew. Gentle lunches shared, conversations that moved from the everyday toward the tender. Musa found himself smiling again in a way that startled him. Months slipped by gently. The rhythm of Musa's new life found its own music. Mornings opened with the hum of students outside his stall. Afternoons closed with the scent of warm dust and old paper. Each sale, each thank you, each child's laugh pulled him further from the memory of the pavement. Grace became a quiet constant. She helped in the store after classes, rearranging books, teasing him about his serious manner. In her presence, the house no longer echoed. When the rains came, she stayed for dinner one evening that turned into 2, then 3, until presence became habit. They didn't need words for what was unfolding. It was simple, honest companionship that grew roots in gratitude and trust. A year later, they married in a modest ceremony attended by neighbors, students, and one distinguished guest, President Ibrahim Traoré, standing in the crowd, smiling like an older brother who had seen a prayer answered. The wedding was not grand, but it was real. No cameras, no journalists, no press releases. Just laughter, song, and the rhythm of a people who still believe that dignity can be restored. That night, when they lit candles in their small home, Musa turned to his wife and said softly, "If one man's kindness can rebuild a life, imagine what a nation could do if it listened to its people." Grace nodded, her eyes reflecting the same hope. Word of Musa's story began to spread beyond the neighborhood. Local newspapers ran a small feature, "The President's Friend Who Found His Life Again." Students who came to his shop didn't just buy notebooks, they came for advice, for encouragement. Soon he started holding short evening classes on reading, basic business, and moral values. What began as gratitude became purpose. Then came the invitation, a national youth summit in Ouagadougou, hosted under the theme Dignity and the Future of Africa. Traoré himself asked Musa to speak. Musa hesitated, unsure of what to say to hundreds, maybe thousands. "Just tell the truth," Traoré said. "Your life is the message." On the day of the summit, Musa stood before a hall of young faces. Cameras rolled, lights glowed, but his voice carried the same calm tone that had returned to him after years of silence. Once, he began, I thought the streets were my destiny. But I learned something greater, that when one person listens, an entire life can be rewritten. Leadership begins not in the palace, but in the heart that still hears its people. Applause rose, soft at first, then swelling like a tide. In that moment, Traoré didn't stand as president, but as a friend, proud, humbled, aware that this was the real purpose of power, to rebuild, not to rule. When Moussa returned home that night, he walked into a house filled with light and laughter. Grace met him at the door, holding a small folded paper, the first ultrasound of their unborn child. He froze, then smiled with the quiet awe of a man who had lived 2 lives. "We will call him Ibrahim," she said, her eyes glistening. Years later, that boy would grow in the same neighborhood where his father had once begged. He would run through the same streets that had once turned away from his father's suffering, now filled with children carrying school books from the very shop Moussa had built. And sometimes, on national holidays when parades filled Ouagadougou, Moussa would sit quietly at the back of the presidential viewing stand. The crowd saw the flags and soldiers. But somewhere between those banners, the president and the man beside him would share a look, a silent understanding that leadership's true test is not in command, but in compassion, because a nation is not measured by how it punishes the weak, but how it lifts them. And in that story, a beggar turned builder, a friend turned leader, lay the simplest, deepest truth of all. Africa's strength is not in gold, armies, or power. It is in the ability to remember one another. The streets that once forgot Moussa now echoed his name. His shop grew into a community school. The children who came to buy pencils left with dreams. And across Burkina Faso, his story became more than an anecdote. It became a parable whispered in classrooms and sung at youth rallies. If you see a man fall, don't pass him by. You may be saving your nation's future. One evening, as the sun melted into gold over Ouagadougou, Moussa locked up his shop and looked across the city, alive, stubborn, hopeful. He remembered his old despair and smiled softly. "The street did not defeat me," he murmured. "It only taught me to rise." In the presidential office, not far away, Ibrahim Traoré looked out the same horizon, unaware that his own reflection was part of that same story, the kind of story that reminds a continent what leadership was always meant to be. Because when the powerful remember the powerless, nations heal. And when friendship survives power, history changes its course.